South Korea is one of the most interesting countries in the world, a nation that rose from famine and total destruction to an economic miracle, and now, in recent years, faces something even more terrifying: demographic collapse and an uncertain future. Today, we're going to take a closer look at South Korea's extraordinary story. Is it really the dream country it's marketed as from afar? Or is it a society struggling with deep structural problems and a fading future? Let's start from the beginning. After World War II and the Korean War, South Korea in the 1950s was one of the poorest countries on Earth. The Korean War alone killed millions within just 3 years. It devastated the economy and pushed the population into extreme poverty. In the mid-1950s, South Korea's GDP per capita was below $100, roughly comparable to the poorest countries in Africa at the time. Even basic necessities depended on foreign aid. For example, school children relied on powdered milk donated from abroad for lunch. During the same period, Turkey, an ally that had sent troops to the Korean War, had a more stable, though still developing, economy. In 1960, Turkey's GDP per capita in purchasing power terms was about twice that of South Korea. In other words, Turkey started from a much stronger position, while South Korea was trying to rebuild itself from the ashes of total destruction. But over the next few decades, everything would change dramatically. In the post-war period, South Korea survived largely thanks to foreign aid. Throughout the 1950s, around 70% of imported goods were financed by aid funds. Turkey also received American support under the Marshall Plan and began investing in infrastructure and industry. However, the U.S.-South Korea relationship was on a completely different scale. Between 1946 and 1976, South Korea received nearly $12.5 billion in aid. Adjusted for today's inflation, that's roughly equivalent to about $120 billion. Then, in 1961, General Park Chung-hee came to power through a military coup and immediately launched an export-oriented industrialization strategy. But there was a huge problem. South Korea had almost no capital. Its electricity production was only about 2% of that of the United States. To solve this, South Korea chose an unusual path. Instead of relying heavily on direct foreign investment, it focused on foreign loans and strategic alliances. By sending troops to the Vietnam War, South Korea gained even more U.S. support. In fact, around $5 billion of that aid came between 1965 and 1973, thanks to Korea's involvement in Vietnam. The U.S. financed the modernization of the Korean Army and awarded major construction contracts to Korean companies. At the same time, in 1965, Park's government normalized relations with Japan. From Japan, South Korea secured $300 million in grants, $200 million in loans, and another $300 million in investments from Japanese companies, nearly $1 billion in total. To understand how massive this was, at the time, South Korea's annual exports were only about $250 million. This single deal was 4 times that amount. With this money, massive industrial projects were launched. By the late 1960s, South Korea began its transition from an agricultural economy to an industrial one. Here's where the real story begins. From the early 1960s onward, South Korea's development strategy centered on giant family-owned conglomerates known as chaebols. Under the first 5-year plan starting in 1962, the state selected specific industries and supported large private companies to invest in them. Some businessmen who had been arrested for corruption after the coup were released in exchange for cooperating with the government under a model often called guided capitalism. Through state banks, these companies received low-interest loans and strong incentives as long as they met export and production targets. In return, they invested heavily in steel, petrochemicals, shipbuilding, automobiles, and electronics. These companies included names we all know today: Samsung, Hyundai, LG, and SK Group. Hyundai began with construction and automobiles. Samsung expanded into electronics and shipbuilding. With strong state support, these companies grew at incredible speed. This state-business alliance turned South Korea into one of the 4 Asian tigers within just a few decades. An economy that was once agricultural and technologically backward became an industrial export powerhouse almost overnight. The numbers are shocking. In 1961, South Korea's exports were only about 1/8 of Turkey's. By 1980, they were 4.5 times higher than Turkey's. Of course, this model had a dark side. Enormous economic power became concentrated in just a few family groups. Even today, the top 4 chaebols, Samsung, SK, Hyundai, and LG, together generate revenues equal to more than 40% of South Korea's GDP. The 1980s marked South Korea's transition to democracy and an acceleration of its economic rise. The 1988 Seoul Olympics showcased the Korean miracle to the world. In 1996, South Korea joined the OECD, officially becoming a developed economy. Think about this. In 1962, GDP per capita was around $100. By 1989, it reached $5,400. By 2006, it surpassed $20,000. In just one generation, average income increased by hundreds of times. Imagine your grandfather earning $100 a year and you earning $20,000 in the same country. That's what the Korean miracle really means. By the 2000s, South Korea seemed to be living the dream. It had become one of the world's top 10 economies. In 2011, its trade volume surpassed $1 trillion, placing it among the giants of global commerce. But then something changed. After the 2000s and 10s, South Korea entered a period of stagnation and, in some ways, decline. And this wasn't just economic, it was social. The miracle began to fade into something much darker. Let's talk about South Korea's biggest problem today: demographics. South Korea now has the lowest fertility rate in the world. In 2022, the total fertility rate fell to 0.78 children per woman, a global record low. In 2023, it dropped even further to around 0.72. For comparison, a society needs about 2.1 to maintain its population. Japan, often cited as an aging society, is still around 1.3, nearly double South Korea's rate. In the 1960s, Korean women had around 6 children on average. Today, it's not even 1. What does this mean? It means South Korea is not just shrinking, it is slowly disappearing. For young people, economic prosperity has become a distant dream. Housing prices have exploded. In Seoul, it's estimated that an average person would need to save their entire income for about 15 years just to buy a home. As a result, nearly 80% of people in their 20s and 30s live in rented apartments. Then there's brain drain. Surveys show that about 75% of Koreans aged 19 to 34 say they would leave the country permanently if they could. Young people have even given their country a dark nickname: Hell Joseon. Joseon was the name of an old Korean kingdom, and by calling modern Korea Hell Joseon, they're saying they feel trapped in a hopeless system, and we can't ignore the suicide statistics. South Korea has the highest suicide rate in the OECD. According to 2021 data, the suicide rate is around 24 per 100,000 people. The second highest, Lithuania, is far lower. This means roughly 13,000 people die by suicide every year in South Korea, more than twice the OECD average. Intense academic pressure, brutal work culture, loneliness, and depression have created a deep sense of social collapse. The government has tried to respond. Cash incentives for childbirth, tax benefits, free childcare, debates about reducing working hours, and regulations to cool the housing market. But so far, the trends haven't reversed. Birth rates keep falling, living costs keep rising, and young people keep losing hope. According to UN projections, South Korea's population, which has already started to decline since 2020, could be cut in half by the late 2080s, from around 50 million to about 25 million. Some scenarios suggest it could even fall to 15 to 20 million by the end of the century. That's catastrophic. A country with too few young people will need workers, which means either large-scale immigration with massive cultural and social changes, or economic and strategic weakness. And right next door is North Korea, a permanent geopolitical threat. And this isn't some distant sci-fi future. 50 or 60 years is just one human lifetime. One generation. In conclusion, South Korea created one of the greatest economic success stories in human history, but today it is fighting for its long-term survival. Corruption scandals involving chaebols, repeated pardons, and a justice system that often seems to favor the powerful are separate issues, but they all feed into the same sense of social decay. Behind the glossy image of K-pop, trendy food, and pop culture, which, by the way, I personally love, and I've spent more than 3 months in South Korea, there is a society under enormous strain. If nothing changes, South Korea may slowly fade into history, not because of war or invasion, but because it simply runs out of people. And that is the quiet tragedy of one of East Asia's most important nations.